Hello everyone, Pineapple here with the newest Batman cartoon, one that had drummed up a lot of interest, both the good and the bad kind, Batman Caped Crusader. A show likened to the original animated series but with a focus and style of its own. A focus on mob activity, corruption and mental health, reinventing a core cast and one-off villains to fit within this strange world it weaves. Many changes divisive, but we'll take a look at them as we go through the show. This was developed by Bruce Timm, a popular and sometimes infamous creator, who has had his hand in many shows, even many DC cartoons starting with the original Batman animated series. But it's also a stereotype that when he appears, weird shit between Bruce and Barbara will follow, so I will immediately say there is no Bruce-Barb relationship. Everyone calm down. But with that being said, why don't we talk about the major characters? And while there are a lot of single episode characters, and characters either being reimaginings or existing characters in minor roles or villains of the week, we'll bring them up as we talk about each episode separately. So let's focus on many episoded characters, if that's even a term. Also, due to the length of this script, I'll be splitting the video in two. This week, we'll cover the characters in episodes 1 to 5, and we'll talk about the rest of the show and some other details next week. First, we have Batman, or Bruce Wayne, played by Hamish Linklater. And he is a bit of a divisive incarnation. As Batman and Bruce Wayne, the characterization is written very well, and due to the show referencing mental health multiple times, the focus given to Bruce, even if sometimes coming off silly, especially in a scene we'll look at later, is a lot more focused on than I seem to recall in many of the other Batman cartoons post-Beyond that I've seen. Some standout character writing being his interactions around Harley, Alfred, and Dent specifically. Whereas with Batman, he gets that feeling of, sure, a no-shit-taking mysterious vigilante, but even if there aren't a lot of specific scenes I can think of, I think they managed to capture the detective side of him well. Though many versions of Batman seem to gloss over, a balance I remember the Batman movie also having. Probably my main problem with this Batman is the performance. There are a lot of clever moments, such as when his voice changes, his Bruce facade dropping, and when he is playing as Bruce, he works quite well, but while I got used to his Batman voice, there were a few scenes where instead of brooding and aloof or intimidating, he sounded bored. Those moments may not have been many, but I found them pretty obvious when they happened. Along with Batman, we of course get Alfred, played by Jason Watkins. This is a pretty good version of the character. There isn't a lot good or bad with the character, but they do make sure to give him his time in the limelight, taking moments to highlight his relationship with Bruce or with the late Waynes. We also get hints towards some secret he's keeping, but I suppose we'll have to wait for season 2 for any of that. So while not stand out, they don't waste the character. Like usual, Jim Gordon is the current police commissioner, played by Eric Morgan Stewart. But while not always the focus character, much like Alfred, he doesn't get wasted. And he is a good character to have when there is such a focus on the corruption of the police force and the hand the mob has on the city. He gets a couple prominent roles, but like many of the side characters, isn't prevalent all the time. But like the other main characters, the sprinkles we get through the show do well to build them up for the finale. A trait shared with our previous characters and our main police force and lawyer characters. With that said, Jim wasn't my favourite. The only favourite being probably my favourite Jim in the show, as there are at least 3 major to minor characters named Jim. But to me, it felt like he was just kind of there for a lot of it without much agency, whereas I got more of those feelings from the other secondary protagonists such as Renee, or our next character. Oh yeah, and oh no, he's black, the world is ending, Jesus. Next is Barbara Gordon, possibly future Batgirl, current lawyer played by Crystal Joy Brown. And I think a lawyer is a great way to take this character. One that I'm told exists previously, maybe in the comics or something like that, but I've never experienced with the character before. It makes for good interactions with both her father as they argue their moral standpoints, and Harvey, the DA. Both interactions weaving into the character's drama in multiple points of the story. Oh, and she's black now. No, really, people are having these issues, and while I disagree that, say, the main comic version of the Gordons should probably stay white, just for consistency's sake, I take issues with representation of character on a case-by-case basis. My only bias being that I'm ginger, so I only get miffed when they replace a white ginger character with a black one without keeping the hair, and they've done it in a lot of the past few years. But really, in this show, their race is not much of a problem, seeming to match the character with the actor. But I'll talk more about the controversies when we finish the plot summary. And of course, we should reiterate that I'm very happy the characters weren't Bruce Timmed, and their relationship seems to be more of a professional courtesy, offering her tips when her or her father are in danger. Next is the DA, Harvey Dent, played by previous Batman Daedric Bader. And Dent himself is probably one of the, while still well characterized and explored, generic or traditional versions of the character. And Daedric Bader plays it well. But after getting good interactions with Barb, Bruce and Thorn, he really shines as one of the semi-antagonists of the two-part finale, following his origin story into becoming Two-Face. But a very different interpretation. Usually I find that commonly Two-Face will be shown as either crazy broken man with an obsession with coins, or his scarred side of his face having its own personality, which could have worked here with the insistence on mental health issues, but instead coming after he makes a choice he believes to be moral, paired with pushing from others, the scarring takes on more of a corrosive and corruptive presence, the ever-present reminder that he and his morals have failed. And that leads him on a really interesting journey in the finale. There are mentions to him having another personality, but nothing's really done with it, explored, or explicitly shown. Now we have the triple threat of our main cop characters, the first and most moral being Renee Montoya, played by Michelle C. Bonilla. Renee gets a lot of screen time, being Jim's most trusted co-worker, and while when focused on, she is an interesting protagonist alongside Batman, once she gets her romantic subplot, and it's summarily dropped halfway through the show, she almost becomes another background character, still being there but in my memory not really getting sufficient focus. Which is okay, the show ebbs and flows with its focus on characters, allowing the roster to feel filled, but the sudden drop once her romantic interest left just feels like a bad writing decision. Left in the cops are the two main examples of corruption, the first being Harvey Bullock, played by an actor I'm always happy to see, John DiMaggio. I find in my experience with the character, I never really noticed him until finding his portrayal in Gotham pretty iconic. But it seems that was the exception, as every other version of the character is a real knobhead. He's a proper smarmy git, and is compelling as such, along with his partner, but the show still takes a couple of small moments to explore the character beyond the stereotype, even if it's not a lot, making him and Flass compelling as almost tertiary villains of the whole show, at points pulling some stunts over on Dent, Gordon, and Renee. Not amazingly dynamic, but fit and slightly exceeded the role, even if, as he is, that isn't an amazing feat. Bullock's partner is Arnold Flass, played by Gary Anthony Williams, a character I had no idea wasn't original, as I have seen him in other projects, but never enough for him to make a big enough impression that I learn his name. But here, he's basically the cooler of the corrupt cop duo, being more calm, collected, and I'd say sometimes cruel, but they both do some shady shit, so that's not really unique. Flass and Bullock at least have a well-written relationship, but as a single character, much like his previous incarnation, I don't find myself caring much. Our final repeating character that is a proper costumed villain is Harley. An interpretation of the character that isn't my favourite, but is a great reimagining, toning down the bubbly girl who fell in love with the Joker, and with his absence we get a quiet, collected, and honestly, if removed from the Harley idea, chilling villain. Leaning into her already existing traits, her flexible moral code that these days steers away from her traditional form of villainy, and her real underlying intelligence, paired with her speciality in the mind as a psychiatrist. And these little changes just work. Even if the character is a little wasted, being taken out halfway through the show, when she could have made an interesting overarching villain, perhaps she could have taken part in Dent's story by using her expertise to manipulate him or something. But as I say, the only solid downside is the pacing of her character. She also gets a great new outfit, fitting her new darker character, but also not ditching the inspiration of her original costume. But as I said, my favourite part of the character is her removal from being just the Joker's lackey, and the show really hones in on that, and makes her a dynamic enough character without it. Finally is the mob boss, who is an underlying antagonist through the show, taking the places of the usual Batman mob characters, Maroni and Falcone. Rupert Thorne, played by Cedric Yarborough. And while he had his hands in quite a few episodes built up from the start, which is clever storytelling, I couldn't get myself to care about the Thorns in general. More than just pushing characters like Dent. No bad writing or anything, I just have no interest. So now with the main characters out of the way, we can do a quick overview of the rights and wrongs of the stories. The series starts with In Treacherous Waters, which manages to introduce the characters and core themes for the whole season quite well. The opening scene does well to both tease the recognisable visage of the Penguin, but obfuscates the twist in the character, being Oswalda, not Oswald Cobblepot, played by Minnie Driver. And while I think I prefer the character male, she is slightly interesting in the fact that she has children that she's kinda quick to dispose of. We get our first scene of Batman. Must be early days as these mobsters try to run away with their loot, not believing in the Batman. But he is quick to take them all down. It's a very well done scene, perfectly showing off the vigilante's character, and showing off some pretty well animated action. Just as he captures the mobsters, the building is destroyed by a mysterious force, leading us into the main credits. Some clips from the show and atmospheric locales under a grainy filter. The music isn't that encapturing either, so while not bad, it is an intro I always skip. After a scene to get the lay of the land between Bats and Alfred, we get to see Babs on the job, doing closing statements where she's mugged at by Dent. It's spelled out pretty quickly Harvey isn't the best of guys, but not evil. Just as Babs puts it,
"Heads, I'll ask for 20 years to life. Tails, he gets the chair."
I'm not betting a man's life on a coin flip. You're an ass, Dent.
And we get a cute foreshadow of Dent's villain persona. We see Batman doing some proper detective work, his sneaking giving me great laughs, and a decent scene where he interrogates an inspector, which is both dramatic and comedic. But like I said, this is one of the few moments where I think Batman sounds more bored than imposing. It's both a shame and a blessing it happened this early on, depending on how you look at it. In the Iceberg Lounge, a boat this time around, we get to see how much of a showman Oswalda is. But once behind the scenes, she's nothing like how she seems. Barb is on the boat with her father, and their interactions are both well written and funny.
It doesn't bother you that half these people want to see you fail?
Oh, come on, honey. I'm sure it's far more than half.
But this scene is the first of many issues to come. I have no idea if it was covered via an update, or perhaps I just had a poor connection, but there are scenes in many episodes of this season where the volume of different speakers inexplicably goes lower than it should, only to come back up soon after. Like I said, I have no idea how this happened, but it's quite obvious and frustrating when it does. But for all I know, it's just the clips I'm using for my editing software. It could be a one-off experience, and maybe other people didn't get this glitch. So I retract my statement if that doesn't happen in everyone else's, but if it was a common thing, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Bruce arrives while Oswalda's kids fuck around, not fun to watch, as she talks with Thorn, who hints that her uglier kid is leaking info to her competitors. Her interrogating him after almost catching Bruce snooping around. His solution to swim back onto the deck from a small pool of ocean water in their floor. Him coming back on deck is a small scene I really appreciate. His cardboard delivery and repeated lines really matching the whole Bruce Wayne Batman personality drama. Oswalda does her kid in, assuming Thorn was right, and while I'm not sure of the delivery of performance, it's nice to see the Penguin intimidating. Her other kid, who was attempting to rizz up Babs, finds her office and is looking for protection from her dad, and eventually gets her help, as he's been the traitor all along. As Babs drives him to gym, they get a pretty cool chase sequence in, but for a young woman lawyer, she's really calm about this. Like, sure, I don't want her to be a jabbering mess, but even with one bullet, she acts so unworried it takes me out of the scene completely. But anyway, they get saved as Batman badassly uses his car to smack the assailants across the road, so she gets the guy to Jim's office. Bullock and Flass are immediately shown as crooked as they inform Oswalda, who decides to use her secret weapon, being the thing that blew up Thorn's warehouse at the beginning, a cannon on the boat. An homage to Penguin's umbrella gun. And it's now aiming at the police station. Batman uses the Bat Sub to navigate the body-filled water and attempts to stop the weapon, getting a pretty good fight sequence in as the main henchman Iggy puts up quite a fight. Babs gets her own agency as Bullock leaves a civilian locked in the station, rescuing her, and although too late to stop the firing of the cannon, he slows Oswalda down and keeps her occupied long enough for the Coast Guard to catch her and for those in the police station to come out fairly unscathed. The episode ends as Bruce laments that now Oswalda is put away, Thorn will fill the massive power vacuum, making him stronger, and it's his fault. A pretty interesting motivation to push Batman more. All in all, a solid first episode. The second episode does a lot more with the concept of changing the villain's origin story in a way that interested and surprised me, even if the final result seemed obvious. We start with an actress Bruce was dating disappearing, and he's interrogated by Renee Montoya. The banter between the two is quite good, not only to watch, but in defining her personality and morality, only for Bruce to be saved by minor character Lucius Fox, in this version playing Bruce's lawyer, played by Bumper Robinson. Batman gives her the seal of approval while using a bug to listen in on her, and she continues to investigate the disappearance by talking to a co-star of the actress, Basil Carlo. So immediately I knew this was going to be a Clayface episode, but to be fair, without it being different for the sake of it, the twists in the story are genuinely creative, and had me interested the whole time, wondering how Clayface would come about. Basil is sad he never gets leading roles since he's older and scary looking, I guess, but seems like a genuinely nice guy, who was quite close with the actress. Renee continues to investigate Basil under suspicion, but he's murdered before she can speak to him again, with the culprit encountering the Bat just outside, with a pretty striking and good-looking outfit in a nice chase sequence. This caught me pretty off guard, and if I wasn't intrigued already, I would have been now. We get a few scenes from the captive's point of view. Wow, just now realizing I never remembered her name. But a creepy doctor is keeping her captive, and the tension and mystery is effective. Dent gets to interact with the cops.
Good luck with the crime fighting Gotham's finest. Oh, and you too, Bullock.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And there's another visually interesting on-set murder. We get some nice scenes of Renee learning the stories from the other cast, Basil apparently desperate to change his face to get better parts, including leading men that would get to be close with the missing actress. The creepy doctor from before was taking a lot of money from Basil to get results, but Basil gets punched for his trouble. After some funny scenes on set, Batman saves the director, having a pretty clever on-set fight, referencing some old Batman comics, I believe. And while the villain escapes, he finds the corpses from earlier murders. But how can that be? Renee was just talking with one of them barely an hour ago! Renee goes to the Mad Doctor's office, but Flass and Bullock decide to eat instead of helping her out. So she confronts him, but is knocked out when in shock at the man's clay-like complexion after she punched him in the face. And Batman gives Basil's body a little poke, revealing its rubber state, being a fake. Once Renee wakes up, she is met by Basil's new appearance, revealing his body was in fact the Doctor. Killed in Basil's spree after the treatment worked, but the actress, Yvonne, that's her name, rejects him, causing him to break down, physically and mentally. So he kidnapped her and killed the others, now deciding to embrace his role as the villain. But, this might not have happened if Yvonne hadn't been so nice to him, and then, as soon as he shows up and says, "I love you," instead of, "I'm sorry I don't love you," she's all, "Ew, get away from me, freakishly handsome man." Here at Pine Iron Apple, we take victim blaming to a whole new level. This is also the earliest episode where the detective angle is given sufficient credence. Sure, a lot is done from Montoya's POV and not Batman's, but as I said before, I like when Batman media focuses less on the superhero and more on the detective angle. Or hey, even getting a nice mixture of both. Basil has set up a scene seemingly from one of Yvonne's movies, and she decides to insult him, leading him to activate his classic death trap, just as Batman arrives, freeing Montoya and getting to beat Clayface into submission with a fun fight. Montoya's rescue is a little off, Yvonne could have just moved much earlier after getting one hand and her legs free. But in the end, Basil is taken in as the dirty cops arrive, and Batman escapes just in time for the other cops to see him. Renee finds the bug and gets a nice little message to tease their future interactions, ending a solid second episode. Episode 3 starts off with Bruce meeting someone special at a museum exhibition of the Elite's jewels, Selina Kyle, played by someone I wasn't expecting, Christina Ricci. Now, the performance is quite good, and in the context of a Batman villain and commentary on Gotham's corruption, Catwoman works. But even with those pluses, this was not one of my top incarnations of Catwoman. The downside of different interpretations is that sometimes they just don't hit with the viewer, and for me, this was one of those times. Some reporter that sounds a lot like Yuri Lowenthal starts talking smart about Martha Wayne, so Bruce punches him in the face. Fair enough. But the court decides he should work through some anger, landing him on Dr. Harleen Quinzel's couch. She comes off as charming fairly early, and her comments paired with the Bruce we've met so far makes for some great analysis of the psyche of both Bruce and Batman, using Harleen's expertise properly. A part of her character rarely used. It also makes the flashbacks to young Bruce in Crime Alley warranted, without having to connect to either an origin story of a villain or having that villain tied intrinsically to Bruce. We get to see some of Selena's home life with a comedic maid who's fun, but once again I'm not too sold on, as we see that while Selena is out of money, she still keeps adopting strays, and she takes inspiration from the Bat to make her own cat burglar persona. I like the Catwoman outfit they picked for this episode, reminiscent of the one highlighted in Brave and the Bold, originating as one of her older regular costumes in the comics. So she starts to spend her time breaking into jewelers, evading the police pretty well, even humiliating our corrupt duo, but after a pretty good first introduction to the Bat, she's taken in.
You inspire me. You have toys?
Meanwhile, in flashback land, Bruce is traumatized, a pretty haunted image with little Bruce, as Harley continues to analyze him well. Selena is let go on a technicality by Dent, Babs easily vocalizing the point of the scene. Selena once again starts to emulate Batman, while he doesn't seem so surprised that she was let go. On the next meeting, we get a nice chase sequence and a nice visual cat pun. But after she starts macking on him, she knocks him around with electric brass knuckles and a car that is comedic in more ways than one. The engine literally purrs like a cat. This episode is so much goofier than the rest of the show. It doesn't detract in any way, but come on. Now successful, Selena is hiding away, the maid getting more ticked at not being paid. But now we can see the more interesting things. Alfred tries to get Bruce out of his Batman face more, while Bruce puts pressure on the museum, luring in the cat. Harleen is skeptical but allows Bruce to go free, offering more sessions but not getting far. We get another flashback as young Bruce still lays in bed, unable to forget the gunshots or Chill's face. But the tension in character work is ruined by this utterly comedic shot of Bruce vowing to Alfred to make the criminals pay. I get it, honestly, but my god, I couldn't hold back my laughter. The way it's shot, he's like, "Mummy, I shit the bed." Well, I suppose, Alfred, I shit the bed. Martha's dead.
Why did you say that name?
Anyway, Bruce wants to make sure Selena... No, sorry, I still just can't get over that shot. Right. So, Bruce wants to make sure Selena is put away for good, so hires a photographer to get evidence as Selena tries to get away. Apparently, this photographer is meant to be Plastic Man, and I have to commend this show for how many references it fits in. Not just things like this and people who look a lot like other incarnations of Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen appearing, but the many references it makes to writers and creators of characters. Not a lot of them feel overstuffed, and a lot are quite subtle, so it feels great when you find out about another one. They do some impressive action, Batman having to escape a bloody panther, however Catwoman tamed that, and Catwoman almost being killed on camera by Flass and Bullock, Batman only just in time to beat them bloody, and make sure Selena actually goes to jail. The photos also show Batman beating up the cops, but the photos are sufficient enough to put Selena away, as Greta the maid runs away with the rest of her money, on a cruise to the Bahamas, and the episode ends with a final flashback from Alfred's perspective, once Bruce refuses to go back to therapy. We see him standing by the car and running into Crime Alley as soon as he hears the gunshots, paired well with the fact that the first still of the credits are their chalk outlines. It's not groundbreaking or anything, but with how much Alfred does for Bruce, seeing him run straight into the first sign of danger to help the Waynes is a fantastic character moment, no matter how small. In some nice pacing, episode 4 deals with the direct aftermath of the photos from last episode. Public opinion of Batman all over the place, with the mayor looking to keep his place in the upcoming election, going to the press and Gordon saying he's going to put together an anti-Bat task force, which Gordo puts Renee in charge of. But going after the Bat is suicide, almost like it's some kind of suicide squad. No. Although, you know what, once it finishes, maybe we should take a look at Suicide Squad Isekai. I won't go over every detail of their original operations, but after a strange introduction of Jim Corrigan as a minor character, you know, the Spectre, and another character named Jim, it's good to see the cops' methodical approach, attempting to lure the Bat out with many fake crimes. But he manages to give them all the slip, outsmarting them. It's nice to see this angle, and usually any cop trying to take Batman on is an imbecile or massive piece of shit, so seeing a battle of wits is a far more interesting route to take. They fail with Dent using that fact in his speeches, so the mayor puts pressure on Gordon, who almost gets him after finding the Bat breaking into the task force office. meaning they basically have one last chance before the mayor takes more drastic action against them. So the task force bring in Harley to profile him. So after she mentions studying under a Mr. Crane, which, if she returns for season 2, may be part of her origin story, who knows, she gives them a pretty good approximation of Batman's motives. Her insight gives Bullock and Flass the idea to use a costumed criminal, finding Firebug, who, like Flass, I originally thought was Firefly, played by Tom Kenny, SpongeBob himself. And while underused, he is a pretty interesting villain psychologically, but is really secondary to the rest of the plot, which is a little disappointing. Barb is representing Firebug, but the corrupt duo make it out of the police station with him, only pursued once she tells Jim and Renee. After some goading, Firebug shows his true colours, absolutely mentally deranged. But the duo leave him to his own devices, telling him everything he needs to escape and wreak havoc with his costume, while they pretend to fix their car. They cover their tracks by roughing each other up. Well, Flass gets roughed up. And after some destruction, they follow Firebug, who we see the twisted vision of, and honestly, he is the most chilling villain we've had so far, even with his minimal screen time. The animation really sells his derangement, if that's a word. The fire kicks up and Batman goes in to stop him, Flass only now calling it in since their prey is there. Gordon knows how bad the situation is, as it used to be one of his areas, but instead the duo send the SWAT in there willy-nilly, while the Bat tries to stop the Pyro and save who he can, having to resort to beating down the cops as he moves. Gordon gets a good spotlight, making his way inside, trying to save as many people despite Flass and Bullock, who find Firebug, now out of juice, and unable to allow him to talk about what they did. Bullock shoots the unarmed mentally ill guy out the window, getting him enough credit to usurp the task force leadership. While Jim and the Bat get some good stuff as they pull a group of children out from the flames. Although Gordon's repeated insistence of
Eastside Flats was on my old beat. This used to be my beat.
feels a little strange. Everything ends fine, but with the duo given too much of a spotlight, and the episode ends hopefully, while Renee and the Gordons enjoy a depressing after-work drink. Episode 5, almost halfway through the show. And this episode has a lot of ups and downs. Although most downs come with the pacing. This is the Harley Quinn episode. Makes sense to give her an episode as main villain, and then bring her back for a big showdown, but this episode is standalone. Although she is introduced 2 episodes earlier, and could have been built up more. This is the last we see of her this season, which just seems like a poor decision to me. It's not a slight on the episode, but is more a comment on the show as a whole. We start with a fake-out where King Tut is found by Batman prowling the streets, turning out to be a snobby rich man who recently donated his wealth. And in parallel, we see a mysterious female voice in some sort of facility, torturing a man dressed as a clown. Admittedly, the tickle torture isn't as imposing as it could be, but hey, I'm sure it is a viable torture route when done right. Harleen and Babs have coffee, joined by Renee for some girl talk. Renee is worried about Jim, these 3 getting to work some good dynamics.
Let's roleplay.
No.
And when they leave, Harleen gets Renee to accept a date the next day. Which, let me tell you, really pissed off some people online. I know, right? A character who's apparently, according to Google, been a lesbian since 2003, and a character who's been bi for a while now. Oh, the horror! Get it away! Get it away! This is also where it becomes prevalent, and someone else has commented on it, that the Harley characterization is inversed. We get a lot more of the fun, goofy Harley when she's Harleen, and when she's Harley Quinn, she has to be darker, stoic, and more intimidating. A nice reversal. Batman investigates King Tut's office, finding a secret room filled with Egyptian memorabilia, which I don't think we really get an explanation for. Kinda weird. And he finds a bunch of used checks to Harleen, before having to fight his way out in a cool stealth scene courtesy of Bullock and Flass. We get to see Harley Quinn's first appearance as she finally gets menacing against an asshole she's working with. So she imposingly kidnaps him, and we get our first look at her base and new costume. It took me a while to come around on the costume, but it works really well in this, even the new colour palette. So while I don't think I want this to migrate to Prime Harley, it's a pretty cool version for this show. Her playpen is also quite the impressive visual, every detail doing well to lean into this new independent Harley. As said before, really leaning into her own tendencies without everything she does playing second fiddle to the Joker, displaying the mental power she has over her patients. Using some great manipulation and dark lines, getting this baby man to beat her new captive into submission. A pretty impressive introduction to how the new Harley operates. Batman continues the Harleen angle while Babs is assigned to King Tut, who after hearing Harleen's name, hearing it as Harley Quinn, runs through Arkham, followed impressively by Babs, who just manages to stop him committing, as the YouTube algorithm likes us to call it, sewer slide, tipping Babs off, even later catching Harleen in a lie, knowing something is up. And Harley's date is the perfect opportunity for a distraction. This makes some good characterization for Barb, as she sees Jim, who convinces her to look into Harleen, even though she wants to trust her friend. Later on, she finds Harleen's office ransacked by the Bat, taking the opportunity to look into her logbook, cleverly finding evidence of her lies, and finding a hidden address that she heads out to investigate, even if the focus is on Harley. I like that they're spreading the agency among the other characters, giving Babs a small spotlight, a boon of having all your characters interact beforehand. But of course, as I made my opinion clear, paying off a little too early. Babs is kept out of the house by its owner, but parks her car away and doubles back, only to be dissuaded by the Bat, him leaving her outside as he sneaks down to the basement. Harleen and Renee are kinda cute on their date, but even so, I can't say I care immensely. But her minion at the house reports Babs' appearance, so she heads over to make sure everything's hunky-dory, getting there in record time as she meets Batman, as he discovers the playpen. Babs has also made her way inside, but apparently Harleen also had time to do a costume change, getting a pretty good confrontation with Batman where he fights the patients, but ends up locked in one of the cells and gassed to unconsciousness. Harley hitting the self-destruct and leaving. Babs finds Batman and tries to save Batman by batting down the door to his cell with a bat. Was that enough bats in a sentence for you? On her way out, Harleen sees Babs' car, heading back to the house to try to save her, but it's too late. The house blowing up and sliding off the cliff as the two women try to escape. The set piece of the collapsing building is pretty well done. Babs eventually left dangling with Harley, a nice repeat from what happened in the flashbacks of Return of the Joker. Both falling after Harley tries to sacrifice herself, and Batman only managing to wake and save Babs. This sacrifice thing is good from a character perspective, reiterating that Harley may be cruel, but is trying to do good in her own twisted way, but I feel like that angle could have been better portrayed. The Bat and Babs share a nice moment as she grieves Harleen's apparent death, Batman utterly failing to console her as he pulls his disappearing act, and the episode ends with Harleen calling Renee from a phone booth, leaving her stood up to go into hiding God knows where. A solid mid-season episode, but the elements it contains, Harley Quinn's reveal and the evolution of her relationship with Babs and Renee, could have been paced better. If those moments were shown in more episodes so that these revelations hit harder, maybe even putting this episode pre-finale, as it involves so many characters, but as it is, it's fine. We have a return to form from the multi-episode build-up to Villain of the Week in episode 6, starting off as a charity van is highway robbed by a spectral highwayman and his ghost horse. I'm not sure they explain the ghost horse, but this is a reinterpretation of Gentleman Ghost. Whereas the usual design evokes a gentleman style, the idea of a gentleman and what it means in certain circles seems to be interpreted a different way than usual, making the Gentleman Ghost a figure who believes in attacking the poor to boon the rich, like a reverse Robin Hood. He appears in a nice homage to the Batman movie, but is at least gentlemanly enough to leave the female of the guards upright. Bruce speaks with Lucius again the next day, who is looking to buy some property, and the talk of the ghost makes for some nice dialogue between Lucius and Alfred, as they discuss the validity of hauntings. Meanwhile, Harvey is very angry that the mayor is going around making him look like a chump, and is jumped by Thorn, here to offer some underhanded help as the growing mobster in town. Harvey refuses, for now, so I can only assume the episode will spend time kicking his ass. Batman starts down the right line of questioning how the ghost picks his targets, but he makes his next appearance on the train Dent happens to be on, doing a press conference on just how swell he'll make life for the common people, while they look at him like he's a complete idiot. Batman manages to find the ghost, and we get a pretty well animated chase scene, Batman getting a look at the ghost's crest before it speeds through a wall, seemingly shredding the valuables with some nice effects. Bruce is still unbelieving while Alfred verbally schools him. Right as Batman ponders the crest, Lucius takes a peek at his new land, coming upon the large house still standing there, the old Craddock estate, being sold by a member of that family, only for the camera to pan to the door frame where the crest sits. Ooh. Bruce looks for the crest in a local library, and thanks to the help of a lovely librarian, he learns the backstory of it, and one James Craddock, our third Jim of the show, who put his family into disarray, losing his fortune, but believing as a noble he had the right to be rich, and for the poor to be poor, he became a highwayman.
I became a highwayman, was daylight robbery.
Bruce learns of the connection to Lucius's new place, and with a funny little interaction with Alfred, they head there immediately.
Heritage Hill, Pennyworth. Don't spare the horses.
Thrashing them now, sir.
Lucius gets the same history rundown, and the house goes all poltergeist as James's ghost comes to punish his descendant for selling to the rabble. But I don't think Lucius is that poor, so that might be racially motivated. I can imagine James seeing the commissioner and being like, "Black police officers? Whatever happened to that noble profession?" Batman comes in to save their hides, and with some more funny dialogue, we get a very well thought out action scene of James trouncing Batman, retreating with honour but swearing their next fight will be the last. He doesn't seem to indicate he knows Batman is Bruce Wayne, so I guess he just has some magical ghostly compass that he can go ding ding ding, rich white man, and that's how he knows who to respect. Harvey is getting talk back from the press, and the Bat finally accepts ghosts are a possibility. And so, with some direction from Alfred, he meets with paranormal practitioner Papa Midnight, or Linton Midnight, a character usually associated with Constantine.
John Constantine?
Constantine.
Is it? I don't care.
Midnight is a fun, but still shady character, giving Batman exactly what he needs to beat James. Noble blood, a vial, and the deed to the house. Everything falls into place as Alfred is of a noble line, and they attempt to exorcise James. The scene and ensuing fight being done fairly well, although it is funny to see Batman doing a magic ritual. He's burned, but before the ritual can finish, he possesses Alfred, manipulating Bruce with his voice and attempting to divulge Alfred's deepest secret. They both get great moments, Alfred asking for death and Bruce refusing to let Alfred go, but in the end he manages to beat the spirit. The scene has some really good ideas behind it, but I just think maybe the writing and the performances could have been brushed up a little to make the scene all the more impactful. Alfred is fine, no thanks to Midnight, who's there dressed in what looks like Gentleman Ghost's usual attire, and takes James's soul as payment for his help. And the episode ends with Harvey finally deciding to meet with Thorn. A solid episode. The Dent subplot was a little poorly integrated, but the Gentleman Ghost mystery was great. And the many subtle and overt scenes between Bruce and Alfred were great, even if they could have been done better, like Bruce's broken voice, desperately hoping Alfred is still alive. A very quick moment, but with how detached this Batman is and the little highlighted interactions between the two this episode really makes them work. Episode 7 is a nice refresher, Batman taking a back seat and letting the police characters take centre stage. Shown easily in the beginning where Jim starts judging Barb on her work as a lawyer. But oh no, she takes it too far when she criticises cops, because American cops are known for being fair and just. Their sides are a little overstated, but the dialogue is written and performed pretty well. And the action gets to start as Renee and Corrigan meet them outside to tell them and us that there's been a hit put out on Jim. Shown pretty simply as some guy appears to try and collect the bounty, only for Corrigan to immediately shoot him down. And who was this nobody who didn't even get a shot off? Floyd Lawton. Yeah, that was meant to be Deadshot. He really didn't get a lot of material. I liked it better when he was Will Smith, for God's sake.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Flass reiterates the info on the hit. Him and Bullock wanting to raise hell in the streets willy-nilly, but Jim is unreceptive to any other measures, being dragged kicking and screaming into literally any protective measures. Wow, this really is pig-headed Gordon the episode. Both Babs and Renee are pissed at him, Babs more so, but while having an emotional scene, Batman appears, finally scaring the daylights out of her, and has some info. The hit came from inside Blackgate Penitentiary itself, and is open, more like a bounty, whoever gets it done gets paid. We get to see the inside of Blackgate looking like Alcatraz on its own island, as these very pleasant cops discuss the inmates they beat to death, taken down by Batman, who starts interrogating prisoners. He finds the go-between and we learn he doubled the price after Lawton's failure, meaning bigger fish are being drawn, and the one who will be the episode's main antagonist, none other than Onomatopoeia, voiced by Reed Scott. and is a pretty good villain for the episode. I haven't read any of Onomatopoeia's comics, but they always came across as a creepy and creative character every time that I saw and heard about them, and I was really wanting an adaptation of the character. Because, thanks to my weird brain, it makes it really hard to get into DC Comics, never knowing where to start. To my knowledge, there are only 2 adaptations of this character, and this one seems to be the most solid version of the character outside of comics, as I recently learned they were on Superman and Lois, which I haven't yet watched, and after looking at one scene on YouTube, I can tell they aren't very faithful to the source material. But they seem to be here, as in both design and gimmick. That, yes, comes off a little silly, but he's a good villain among the other interpretations so far. But maybe he could have been given more agency, as a lot of the time you see him standing back and watching his grunts fight for him. Which, yes, helps keep him as an intimidating and scary presence, but when he gets defeated, also kinda makes him look like a bit of a chump. Batman finds the original hitter, who is appropriately afraid, being beaten up, the episode cutting away before we learn anything else. Gordon is once again lectured to, eventually shepherded into heading for a safe house, as he was perfectly fine letting an army of assassins and mobsters blow up the neighbourhood to get to him, and then spends his time continuing to take pot shots at Barb's profession. Wow, this guy is so relatable. Although coming off of that, the episode is suitably tense once again, as Batman has important information for the cops they just miss. After some nice atmosphere building and the funny visual of Renee and both Jim squished into the back seat, they're attacked by another cop car in disguise, hitting the driver, leading Babs to once again have to take the wheel in an action scene, only narrowly missing the cliff and sending the distracted assassins off the edge, as for some reason the driver decides to gasp instead of turn. They decide to head for a hospital, but the car cuts out, leading them to come to the under-construction Wayne Gardens, hiding out in a half-built house, with Babs looking at the camera, giving this dumb fucking smug look. Onomatopoeia manages to follow the car by its oil spills, his gimmick making him pretty hilarious.
Ding 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 ding. Yeah, we have a winner.
And the cops, now one down, are arguing again. If it's not father and daughter, it's Renee calling the Gordons rich boys. Sure, what they're saying makes sense and makes for good dialogue, but it's a little infuriating having them arguing non-stop for the past 15 minutes, and all of these opinions only coming up in this episode. Renee, not to my memories ever bringing up any sort of resentment towards the Gordons, and unless I'm forgetting something from the first episode, I don't think Jim and Barbara have had any conversations about their jobs before, it all coming to a head in this episode with no build-up. Wow, I find myself really liking this episode by the end of it, but there really were a lot of overlooked things. Onomatopoeia and his boys find them, creating a pretty tense standoff. Corrigan and Babs covering the back, the lawyer as fearless as ever, and come on. They have Babs' profession there to clash with her father, which is interesting, but beyond that, it doesn't seem to change her as a character. She's just as badass and fearless holding a gun as she would be as a cop or fighting as Batgirl, with no clear justification. In this episode, she will continue to have the shit beat out of her and walk it off with barely a scratch. I can kind of excuse that when the professional trained cops get out of a fight, but you don't expect Alan Shaw to beat the shit out of someone, or fearlessly shoot back in a standoff. And no, before anyone says, I'm not being all, she shouldn't be brave and badass because she's a woman. No, I think Montoya proves that false. I'm just saying the little variation of having Babs respond differently to the 3 seasoned police officers would seem more realistic, and not necessarily take any agency away from her. While they're distracted, Bats lays the beat down, getting opportunities for the cops to fight back, while Onomatopoeia watches. And we also get Corrigan and Babs attacked by 2 assassins. Batman gets to Onomatopoeia directly, and his gimmick works better here, in the well-choreographed fight, and the way Batman beats him up is pretty fun and badass. While that's happening, this big beefy man repeatedly hits the cop and lawyer with heavy metal and other blunt objects in the head. But both are fine, I guess. Barely a scratch on them. The Bat gets to tell Jim that the hit was cancelled, but it wasn't for him. It was for Babs, which is a pretty interesting turn. Even if it's strange that Flass and Bullock seem to think it was for Jim as well, according to their street contacts. You think at least someone will bring up the fact that it was Barbara and not Jim. Corrigan turns on Babs to try and collect, but Jim stops him. Everything turning out okay in the end, as the assassins and Corrigan are led away. Babs also gets to meet with the guy who tried to kill her, unhappy with the sentence he got. as she defended him in court. The scene is pretty good, but that makes the moral of the episode very confused. It doesn't really show on Babs going forward whether she now agrees that all criminals are bad, or that she still thinks some are just victims of circumstance. Sure, she will get similar agency in the two-part finale, but it doesn't directly relate to her journey here. I just wished we got a better look at how this specific incident affected her, and Jim's opinions on either of their jobs, as the episode did set up right at the beginning. I liked the episode, but that's not to say it didn't have problems. Onomatopoeia could have been done better, even if I did like him here, and as I said, the character-based narrative set up in the beginning wasn't really used. Also, when they're all protecting Jim, making him such a dickhead made me wish someone would just shoot him already, so they went a bit too far in that department. Now we get the last one-off story before the two-part finale, episode 8. We start at an orphanage, where two familiar faces sneak off to see the travelling circus. These two are Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, and if you're any fan of Batman, you'll probably recognise at least one of those names as being the Robins. A very strange choice for this show to take, but considering the other two Robins they introduce later, I'm pretty happy with the selection. They're found by a surprise goth girl, Natalie, played by McKenna Grace, who lures Dick into the circus, leaving Jason on his own. It's a pretty obvious start to the mystery, but no less effective. The fun at the carnival is sold well as Bruce entertains another rando lady friend and runs into Leslie Tompkins, in this incarnation the carer of all the orphanage children that Bruce helps fund. Among the bearded ladies and two-headed goats, we find another act, Anton Knight, played by Haley Joel Osment, who in his stage chicanery demonstrates a machine that apparently makes one immensely stronger. He gives off slightly creepy vibes as he empowers a de-gothed Natalia, who the machine seemingly works on, even if it just looks like a bunch of goofy special effects. Jason is lurking, missing Dick, so Natalia lures him away to find his friend. Dent is stuck in the dunk tank, but sees Thorn lurking. All this going on while Natalia is kidnapping Jason, just like Dick. And soul-stealing, only to be interrupted by Anton, her brother who is trying to help her with her child soul addiction, only just needing that one last fix. Now Leslie is starting to get worried, but Dent couldn't care less, her actually getting help from Bruce, who takes off after Stephanie Brown, one of the Bat family, which just really quickly off the top of my head, I think probably has the most identities of these Robins, being Spoiler in her own right, one of the Robins, and a Batgirl. All the Dent stuff feels strange, interrupting the plot, but by the end it does pay off well, leading us into the two-part finale, as Thorn tells him to take some money in turn for a fixed court outcome. Meanwhile, Bruce follows Stephanie into the Hall of Mirrors, and this next bit I'm torn on. In his desperation to find the girl, the circus troupe, including Waylon Jones, become interested in him, seemingly assuming he's a pedo. It's very funny as they wail on him and leave him in a ditch, but I'm certain there might have been better ways to make sure we get a time jump to make sure the climax works as intended from a timeline perspective. Once he wakes up after some time, he gets into his uniform, while Anton finds his sister sucking Stephanie. I could have reworded that kind of sounds like some fanfiction shit. And upon reflection, having written that joke into the script, I'm only now realizing I wrote that about a child character. Ah, that's awkward, right after the pedo jokes. Anton starts freaking out, so Natalia is like, why don't we just kill the kids, lol? If you really love me, you'll let me murder the children. Anton responds in a sane way to that, so Natalia throws him around, breaking his fucking spine, and going out to suck another kid. Okay, no, I'm taking 5 to find another way to say that. Bruce interrogates Waylon, looking for Natalia, and Dent, feeling guilt at the whole bribery thing, swears to Leslie to help with the kids issue, although pretty much only just calling the cops. Batman finds the trailer, the kids, and Anton, who even now is asking to help Natalia. A pretty good character moment. And while saying that she obviously needs mental help, and she can't be caught in the sunlight, he passes away. Which I'm pretty surprised by. Sure, none of the kids actually die, but this episode is still kind of brutal on an emotional level. We meet the last Robin, Carrie Kelly, practicing with her slingshot to take down any big bad kidnappers, but is taken off guard as Natalia, using her kind face, disarms her and tries to give her the old 1-2 buckle my shoe 3-4 suck your soul. Carrie badassly knees Natalia and makes a run for it, and with how easily the other kids were taken out, I like that Carrie, probably the least popular of the four, originating from The Dark Knight Returns, gets the agency. The noise attracts Batman as Carrie tries to hide among the trees, in a nice tense scene, but is caught and subsequently saved by Batman. The fight between Natalia, or as foreshadowed by the episode title, the comic character Nocturna, is good. She's clever and brutal, even with Carrie getting to assist, but once Batman tells her about Anton, she loses the will to fight. And in a beautiful scene as the sun rises, Batman shields her in his cape as she starts to burn, while she mourns her brother's death, taking her and Carrie back to the others. Later on, all the children are in the hospital. Guess this ward will have to be called the Robin Room, while Natalia is being studied. And that's all we hear of her. We end the episode, as I said before, with a lead in to the final arc of the season, Dent standing up for himself and having the criminal taken away. But while in the bathroom, Thorne's minion takes his chance, getting retribution via face acid. I thought this was Gotham, not London. Nocturne is an overall solid episode with some nice heart to it, and references galore that really work. Sure, it was a little distracting popping back to Dent every now and then, but the payoff was definitely worth it. We start the two-part finale with episode 9, and we get a pretty nice nightmare sequence from Dent as we learn of his insecurities and how he's now living. Farewell after the attack, losing the election and resigning in the meantime. In his messy apartment, and already showing signs of his bipolarity. With the cops, Jim is pissed that no one knows who attacked Dent, who is refusing to tell them the real story. Bullock's surprisingly supportive of Dent. Meanwhile, Bruce meets Harvey in an attempt to get him out of his shell, inviting him out for a meal, trying to cheer him up. The scene is really interesting as Bruce keeps pushing him, and with the added stress, paranoia, and his inability to keep his darker thoughts separate, causes Harvey to have a very public freakout, unmasking his damaged face, almost punching Bruce in manic rage, and fleeing in shame. This is really nice character stuff, not only for getting an interesting examination of Dent unwinding, but as Bruce puts on the cowl, Alfred gives him a verbal lashing, criticizing Bruce's pushing of Dent to get the name of his attacker. Dent spends time talking to himself, and in a desperate moment pulls a Batman, stopping a criminal in an alley, and decides the outcome of the criminal with his coin. The scene is clever, tense, and the acting, even from the extras, is good. Once again, I like seeing Harvey's descent, and lack of two defined personalities. It's more like extreme bipolarity, not helped by small delusions as he convinces himself his actions are noble. Renee goes to check on Dent, but he's nowhere to be found. The next time we see him, he's putting pressure on mobsters to find Zito, in revenge for the whole acid thing. Once again letting his violent tendencies out, as after almost letting the man go, he beats the shit out of him as he gets insulted. Thorne is uncaring about Dent, but Batman is hot on Dent's heels, Alfred once again chastising him, which gets a great show of emotion from Bruce. Both Dent and then Batman interrogate Zito's now ex-girlfriend, pointing them both in Zito's direction, Dent storming the safe house and getting absolutely menacing as he ties Zito up and gives him a banging monologue and burning him to death, Batman unable to get there in time to save him. It's badass, but I don't think a bottle of whiskey would go up like that. Dent is having a little freak out, but Batman catches up, Harvey absolutely slamming him into a nearby truck. Ouch. Bullock informs Thorne of the danger and he takes it seriously, but somehow in another great fight scene, Harvey breaks in via a car and in the dark murks most of Thorne's men. The confrontation is great, ending with Harvey almost killing Thorne's kid before Batman stops him, Batman's head injury becoming symbolic, as you can see by the two Harvey. But the Thorns get away, snapping Harvey back to reality, knowing that he has to be stopped before the other guy finishes the job. Which is weird because other than doing this second person talking, there's no evidence of multiple personalities. For a show with such a focus on mental issues, it's like they couldn't decide which way to go with Dent. In a great bit of irony, Harvey's lawyer arrives, ending on the reveal that it's Barbara. Like I said, the ideas seem a little ill-defined, but there's a lot of great stuff in this episode. A lot of payoff to build up, acting, cool action, and Batman being challenged emotionally. Let's see if the finale can match or get better. With episode 10, we come to a close. Harvey and Babs are already off to a bad start, but she uses his coin trick from episode 1, getting him on board and waiting for an independent psychoval. Thorne is after Dent, using a very stupid analogy for his feelings.
He's an itch that needs to get scratched.
We get some nice stuff in Arkham, Harvey helping another inmate, and during a meeting with Babs, he snaps again, resigning himself to prison time, disgusted that he has to use his old, same backhanded tricks if he wants any leniency. Batman uses his little teleporting trick into Babs' office, her giving him the deets, and Batman offering tips, per not in the way you'd expect from a Bruce Timm show. But they also further their relationship, as he gives her his number. Bruce goes to see Harvey himself, apologising for pushing him, but offering more help. As if mirroring Two-Face, a little bit of Batman comes out of Bruce, absolutely lashing out at his friend's self-loathing. It was shocking in just the right way.
You're not somebody else.
That's not really justice, is it?
Don't start growing a conscience now, Dent. Just help yourself, that's all I'm saying.
Harvey is about to be transported to his hearing, but he's kidnapped by Flass and Bullock, Barbara following close behind as they take him to be executed. Mob style.
Move it, mob style!
Flass is coaching Bullock, which Harvey takes advantage of, crashing the car once they start fighting. This allows Babs to catch up, but since Dent wants to run, she takes off one handcuff and puts it on herself, driving away with Harvey as the crooked cops wake up. Scared Dent'll tell, but Thorne has more men looking around. Babs informs Jim and Batman, getting a priceless reaction from Harvey, but they're followed by Thorne's men as they get to the docks. Harvey gets a nice little talk about how he started off trying to do the right thing, but becoming an asshole, because that's the way the world works, which is an interesting concept, but I wish we'd seen more of the hopeful, happy, good guy Dent, and less kinda good but mostly asshole Dent. The crooked duo figure out Babs is with him, ready to execute the both of them, as Babs and Harvey manage to reach Jim, Renee, and Batman in the dense fog. Harvey is still pretty depressed, but Batman and Jim give him a pep talk as the gangsters approach, Batman sliding through the fog to take them down, giving us some pretty fun visuals. Harvey gets them away from the cops to try and talk Babs into running, almost hitting her in a rage after beating one of the mobsters, but she doesn't let up. Wow, absolutely nothing phases any of these characters, apart from Dent's own rage and depression. Batman takes some more guys out, and tells the cops that he'll find Babs and Harvey, who continue to sneak around pretty tensely, but Harvey gets hit, literally begging Babs to run as she carries him away, but close to her car they make their way back around, followed very closely by Flass and Bullock, but Jim is quick to put Bullock in his place. Unfortunately, they all miss Flass, who immediately guns for Barb, Harvey taking the shot, which leaves Batman with the gun. And sure, we all know he's not going to kill Flass, but the moment is still strong and emotional, as he fires all around Flass's head, gives him severe head trauma with his fist, and lobs the pistol into the ocean. Harvey dies in Barbara's arms, Jim letting Batman get a head start as the other cops finally arrive. And as Batman goes to the cave, he despairs at how rigged the system seems to be. But a pep talk from Alfred finally has Bruce calling him by his first name, not just Pennyworth, as he speeds off to send Thorne a message he won't soon forget, cutting him on the ear. Hold on, 17 days between this and Trump. A criminal getting clipped on the ear by a projectile? Since it was made beforehand, does that mean Batman Cape Crusader predicted the Trump assassination attempt?
I'd rather not say, but the answer is yes.
Anyway, that leaves us on a nice hopeful note. But of course we get a tease for the next season, as in this rundown shack, some kidnapped people are murdered, testing what is clearly Joker venom, as the man himself watches. Although I kind of hope we get a different kind of performance for this Joker next season, because the one word he gets makes him sound less like the Joker than Jared Leto ever was. That was a solid finale. Sure, there could have been some changes to make the plot smoother, some changes to Babs and Dent, such as Dent being more moral in the start, or Babs getting more badass as time goes along, crescendoing here, perhaps foreshadowing Batgirl. I just feel if these characters felt more changes along the way, the season's arc resolution would have felt more compelling. I've spoken about it back with the characters, but there are some larger points to talk about when it comes to the gender and race politics in this show that people really like to talk about. Without talking about one specific character, I've seen a lot of criticisms about the body shapes, mostly complaining that the women don't look like One Piece characters. But I like how different this style is, most of the action characters like Renee and Jim having chunky beefy builds, which is probably more realistic than giving a female cop a massive ass or cleavage. Batman might stand to be a little bigger, and I like the style of the portly Alfred design. Harley's new look, still with a skin-tight outfit, does show off her female assets, but not to Suicide Squad levels, and doesn't take away from her character. Just as Renee not being built like a toothpick makes sense, and looks good from a character design perspective. So I'd say when it comes to body types, the show pretty much always hits with its own style. Nothing drastic to complain about, and it feels like they put some real effort into the character designs. But that isn't the only criticism about changes in the characters' looks. Of course, race and gender also come into it. Really, the only gender change I can think of off the top of my head would be Penguin. And at the end of the day, I don't care enough about Penguin to be enraged, but apart from her children, nothing is really done with this change. They could have leaned into the two-faced Showtune hostess gangster angle, but since she's only a character for the first episode to set up Thorn, it ends up just being an unnecessary point that doesn't really need discussing. I've heard that in a news article, it was said by the showrunners, maybe even Bruce Timm himself, that it was done because Batman lacked really good female villains that weren't his love interests or something along those lines, and that's just a lie, so I don't know what's going on with those articles. But of course, there are also complaints about race changes, the Gordon family being a prime example. And I think it might actually add, even if no interpretation including this one actually makes use of his race, you'd think that the cop that wants to solve corruption would get something added to his character by being black in a city where all the rich mobsters are white. But it's really just more of a baseless creative choice here. And when it comes to Babs, well, they kept her ginger hair, so I got no complaints. As a ginger, I find it strange that so many ginger superhero characters in adaptation are race changed, and the designers don't think about their second most prevalent feature, their hair. It's simple to colour either a drawing or an actor's hair, so you don't change 100% of the character's appearance, keeping them at least somewhat recognisable, and they hit the right balance for me here. The other major character change is Harley, not only in race but personality, the goofy self being the therapist and the serious self being the costume. But her race also doesn't come into play at all. Maybe it helps that her new costume works better with her body type and face, but once again, I'll touch on the hair thing, which I think is consistent, as I know in at least some continuities Harley is a fake blonde.
Well, the joke's on you. I'm not even a real blonde.
So it's perfectly sensible that she may just have black hair, and perhaps, now that she's implicated in her crimes, she might turn up as a blonde for a disguise next season. At least that's the way I'd take the show. Strangely, the more touchy race change comes in the minor character that is Flass, originating as a white guy in the comics, and his first appearance there in Batman Volume 1, issue 404, where he beats up a black kid for carrying a comb that slides kinda like a knife, excusing himself because he felt threatened. So it's kinda weird to get a kinda racist character and make him black. I personally think that's a far more divisive change than Harley or the Gordons, and I think I saw one person talking about it, which makes me think that these outraged people don't think beyond, ooh, white character is black or Asian now, how woke. So, over this season's 10-episode run, we get a lot of solid episodes, interesting reinterpretations of characters, and stories, and an attempt to build a rich world by fleshing out the characters over the show. The cops, Dent and Babs, and of course Batman himself, getting the most change of these characters. But a lot of this progression could have been done better. I've touched upon Babs and Harvey, but even when Bruce makes mistakes, lashing out or pushing Harvey, not much comes of it. And the only massive thing that we see is that he becomes slightly softer around Alfred in the last 5 minutes. Not much beyond episode 7 is done with Jim, and that's kinda sad. So while individual episodes work as a season with multiple arcs, I feel a little more care or attention could have been taken to make it work much better as a whole, and releasing this whole season all at once, and not weekly, highlights this issue. My favourite episode was probably 5. I found Harley really interesting, and having Batman and Babs use it as a focal point for interactions made for a solid plot. And it's probably the most emotional focus Renee gets outside of episode 2, only for her to seem to stagnate for the rest of the show. Beyond suddenly lashing out at Barbara in episode 7 for, I guess, not liking how violent Gotham is as a city. A pile of good things and undercooked things, which come together to make a fine show, but one that could have been done a lot better with more feedback or time put into it. But the place it comes from seems genuinely creative and appreciative of the source material, so I'll give the first season of Batman Caped Crusader a 7 out of 10. Wow, not often I agree with IGN's rating. Episode 5 being my favourite, and I suppose episode 3 and 4 had great stuff, but were probably the episodes that interested me the least. Thank you everybody so much for watching part 2 of my review of the Caped Crusader. Comment down below if you wish, or if there's something you want me to check out. I'm open to checking out more DC stuff. Maybe we'll see more Batman movies, take a look into the comics, or maybe start the original animated series and beyond. As I've always wanted to cohesively watch the original series all the way through Justice League Unlimited and Static Shock. And consider subscribing to the channel, and if you do, ring that notification bell so that you're told every single time that I make an upload. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next review. Bye!
Toast. A little piece of toast. Because there's so much to choose from. There's brown bread, white bread, all sorts of wholemeal bread. It comes in funny packages with writing on the side.